The illusion of peace. From the outside, Emily Carter's life was the picture of suburban perfection. Her days began in their stately white colonial on the tree-lined avenues of Westchester County, New York, a neighborhood where every manicured lawn seemed to compete for the cover of a lifestyle magazine. Emily, poised and graceful, was known throughout the community as not just a devoted wife and mother, but also as the quietly efficient co-founder of Carter & Carter Innovations, a thriving tech company she had built alongside her husband, David. Each morning, Emily slipped into a carefully curated routine, brewing rich coffee in the sunlit kitchen, exchanging a brief, polite conversation with David as he scrolled through emails at the breakfast table, and packing homemade lunches for their teenage daughter, Sophie. Evenings were reserved for charity banquets, school board meetings, and cocktails with other prominent couples. Emily moved effortlessly through these obligations, her smile always warm but never too wide, her conversation polished and measured. Beneath the surface, however, a subtle tension lingered, a persistent unease that Emily skillfully tucked away behind her practiced composure. Over the years, she had grown skilled at hiding her own fatigue, smoothing over David's increasingly frequent absences with plausible explanations both to herself and others. To the world, they were the Carters. Successful, generous, and in love. At the heart of Emily's carefully balanced world was her closest friend, Olivia Reynolds. Olivia, vibrant and outspoken, had been a part of Emily's life since their college days at Columbia. Their friendship was the kind that others admired, intimate, enduring, and seemingly unshakable. Olivia lived nearby. Her daughter attended the same private school as Sophie, and the two women often spent lazy Sunday afternoons sharing bottles of wine and laughter on Emily's back patio. Emily cherished these moments, feeling, if only briefly, that she had built a safe haven immune to disappointment. There was a comfort in the rituals she and Olivia had forged, trading confidences about work, motherhood, and ambition, supporting each other's charitable causes, and even sharing mild jokes about their husbands' quirks. As summer turned to fall, their social calendar overflowed. Fundraising galas, business milestones, and weekends in the Hamptons filled with laughter and easy camaraderie. Emily delighted in orchestrating these gatherings, priding herself on her ability to unite friends and family in harmonious celebration. The gentle compliments from neighbors, the approval of business partners, and the gratitude of their daughter were affirmations that she was living the life she had always envisioned. Yet, despite the smiles and success, Emily often found her thoughts drifting in moments of solitude. Late at night, after David's footsteps faded down the hall and the soft hum of neighborhood life quieted, she would stare out her window at the distant city lights, wondering if contentment would ever feel effortless again. Sometimes a flicker of doubt would cross her mind, but she was quick to dispel it. After all, everything she had, her family, her marriage, her company, was the result of unwavering sacrifice and tireless dedication. If there was something amiss, it was simply a rough patch or a figment of her imagination. For now, at least, Emily allowed herself to believe in the fragile tranquility she had constructed. The world saw peace and happiness, and that, she reminded herself, meant it must be real. The first cracks. It started with small moments, almost imperceptible at first, fleeting signals that something was subtly shifting within the Carter household. Emily Carter, ever the attentive wife, noticed the changes well before she could name them. David, once meticulous about keeping their family calendar updated, became increasingly evasive about his evening commitments. Meetings ran late. Business trips came up with little notice. Text messages lengthened while conversations with Emily shortened. One evening, Emily waited for David at the dinner table, their daughter Sophie chatting animatedly about her day at school. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked past 7, then 8, the candlelight flickering over barely touched food. When David finally walked through the door, his shirt rumpled, eyes distant, he muttered a quick apology about a last-minute call with investors. Emily tried to brush off the knot of unease that tightened in her chest, reminding herself that growing a company demanded sacrifices. But the pattern persisted. David's phone, once casually left on countertops, now seemed glued to his side. He silenced calls in Emily's presence, slipping out onto the patio to answer in hushed tones. Text notifications would flash on the screen. Numbers with no names, messages quickly deleted. When she asked about his increasing secrecy, David smiled tightly, citing market pressures and the need for discretion in business negotiations. His tone, polite but distant, left little room for further questions. Emily's instincts, honed over years of navigating both the tech industry and social circles, quietly alerted her to the undercurrents. She noticed how, during gatherings with friends, David's attention would drift more and more, his phone always in hand. He laughed less around the dinner table, his eyes clouded with worry or distraction. Occasionally, he would schedule impromptu strategy sessions at the office that extended deep into the night, despite there being no pressing company crisis that she was aware of. The unease grew when Emily spotted subtle changes in their daily routines. David, who once insisted on their Saturday morning runs together, now found excuses: injuries, deadlines, fatigue. He began to frequent new restaurants she'd never heard of, returning home with hints of unfamiliar perfumes and traces of a different cologne on his suit. His wardrobe shifted as well. Suddenly, designer shirts and meticulously styled hair replaced his usual, more relaxed attire. More than once, Emily caught herself making excuses for David not just to Sophie, but to herself. She reasoned that perhaps all marriages went through such phases, that maybe, after more than a decade together, some distance was inevitable. Still, each rationalization felt flimsy, unconvincing. The foundation of trust that she'd always relied on no longer felt as solid as she wanted to believe. Seeking reassurance, Emily reached out to Olivia, her closest confidant. Over chilled glasses of Chardonnay on the back patio, she let her guard down for a moment. "Do you ever feel like you and Ben are just ships passing in the night?" she asked, careful not to seem overly concerned. Olivia, ever lively, waved off the question with an easy laugh and offered up her own stories of marital quirks. She dismissed Emily's unease as ordinary, something all working couples faced. For a brief moment, Emily let herself accept the explanation. Yet, in the quiet space of the night, the doubts kept returning. She found herself retracing small details: the careful way David now checked their shared credit card statements, the locked briefcase he took with him everywhere, the string of late-night texts. Emily's mind cycled through possibilities: stress, burnout, maybe even a difficult client. But none of them seemed to fully account for the growing emotional distance. By the end of the month, the cracks had widened. Conversations at home grew stilted, with David expertly steering talk away from himself. Emptiness echoed in the house after Sophie went to bed, leaving Emily alone with unanswered questions and the steady hum of her own doubts. Yet she told herself that the best course was patience. She clung to the hope that perhaps things would settle, that this was only a rough patch, that they would find each other again once life calmed down. Still, somewhere deep within, Emily could not ignore the chill that had settled in the spaces between them, or the nagging suspicion that the peace she had built was more fragile than she dared to admit. The betrayal exposed. The unraveling of Emily Carter's world was not the result of a single cataclysmic event, but a slow, excruciating peeling back of layers until the truth stood raw and undeniable. The first blow came in the form of a text message, a simple notification flashing across David's phone while he was showering one evening. Emily, intending only to silence the persistent buzz, couldn't help but notice the preview. "Last night was unforgettable. When can I see you again?" Oh. The initial of the sender set off a cascade of dread that ran cold through her veins. Emily stared at the screen, her heart hammering, mind racing for explanations. Olivia. Of course. The idea seemed ludicrous. For a moment. Olivia was her closest friend, her confidant, the godmother to Sophie. Yet, as Emily sank against the pristine marble countertop, memories and small details from the past months twisted together, forming a new, painful clarity. The unfamiliar perfume, the lingering glances at their dinner parties, the inexplicable sense of being watched, appraised. Determined to know for certain, Emily began to pay closer attention. She scrolled quietly through messages on the family tablet that synced with David's email. Each message she uncovered was another nail in the coffin of the life she thought she knew. Secret dinners, masked as business meetings, hotel reservations in Manhattan, heartless exchanges that mocked the vows she and David had once promised each other. There was no ambiguity. David and Olivia were in the depths of an affair, and the betrayal was so meticulously planned, so cruel in its orchestration, that it left Emily breathless. She felt sickened not only by David's duplicity, but by Olivia's casual treachery. How many times had Olivia counseled her, poured her wine, listened with supposed empathy as Emily confessed her marital woes? The sting was amplified by the knowledge that her closest friend, someone she'd trusted with her most intimate secrets, had been constructing an entirely different world behind her back. Emily's confrontation with David was not the storm of accusations one might expect after so profound a betrayal. Instead, it was defined by a chilling stillness. She waited until Sophie was at a sleepover and the house was unnervingly quiet. David, emerging from his study, found her seated on the living room sofa, a printout of his emails on the coffee table between them. "I know about you and Olivia," Emily said, her voice devoid of tremor, each word measured and clear. For a moment, David's expression flickered, something between panic and irritation, but he quickly regained his composure. There were no apologies offered, no attempts to explain. Instead, a coldness crept in, something almost rehearsed in his detachment. "It was bound to come out sooner or later," he replied flatly. "Let's avoid dramatics, Emily. This marriage has been over for a long time." His words cut deeper than Emily anticipated, yet she kept her composure. Even as he accused her of being distracted by work, of growing distant, she recognized the familiar pattern: projection, blame-shifting, anything to skirt accountability. The real shock, however, was not David's callous confession, but Olivia's reaction. When Emily confronted her the following day, with trembling hands but a controlled voice, Olivia did not deny the affair. She met Emily's eyes with a challenging glint, flashing a smile that was more smirk than apology. "I never wanted to hurt you," Olivia said, sounding almost bored. "But let's be honest, Emily. You always made everything about you. The perfect wife, the perfect entrepreneur, the perfect friend. Maybe it's time you learned that you can't always win." Devastation turned swiftly to steel inside Emily. The double betrayal, the cold dismissal of her pain, the veiled competitiveness in Olivia's tone, all of it hardened her resolve rather than breaking her spirit. To compound the humiliation, David wasted no time asserting his power. Within days, he initiated legal proceedings that forced Emily to leave the house, claiming it as his property given his majority stake in Carter & Carter Innovations, and manipulating technicalities within their prenuptial agreement. Emily packed her belongings in silence, watched by David's calculated indifference and Olivia's veiled satisfaction as she walked out of the home she had built for her family. For a brief, harrowing moment, she allowed herself to grieve, to let the full weight of betrayal, humiliation, and anger crash over her. But even as she left the immaculate home behind, Emily resolved that she would not beg, not plead, and certainly not allow herself to be defined by the petty victories of her husband and ex-best friend. This, she realized, would not be the end for her, but the beginning of a reckoning. Silence, and self-renewal. Emily Carter walked out of her former home with her head held high, even as the weight of loss threatened to crush her with every step. She did not allow herself the luxury of a tearful breakdown, not in the presence of David's cold indifference, nor under Olivia's satisfied, watchful gaze. Pride was all she had left, and dignity would be her shield. The night air pressed heavy against her as she loaded the last suitcase into her car, the engine humming in the silence that fell over the pristine suburban street. There was no one to see her go, and that suited her perfectly. Let them believe they had won. Their victory was only the beginning. Emily's first days away from the life she had built felt suspended, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. She moved into a modest rental apartment on the edge of White Plains, trading perfection for anonymity. The apartment was clean, functional. No sweeping staircase, no curated gallery wall, no echo of the laughter that once filled her home. For the first time in years, she had a space entirely her own. Boxes lay piled in corners, barely unpacked. She let them sit. The rituals that had once ordered her days, lavish breakfast spreads, calendared social events, orchestrated family moments, fell away, exposing a raw schedule defined only by necessity. In these early hours and long nights, Emily let herself grieve, but only in measured private doses. She would set a timer, 20 minutes to replay memories, to let anger and sadness run through her veins unchecked. When the alarm sounded, she would snap back to composure, wash her face, and press forward. There would be time to mourn later. Now was for regrouping. Her world had shrunk. No more charity, banquets, or impromptu dinner parties. No more gentle voices in the halls, or Sophie's laughter echoing from upstairs. She spoke to her daughter every night, their conversations gentle and careful, both avoiding topics too close to the heart. "This is just temporary, Mom," Sophie would say. Emily smiled, always, even when she wanted to cry. "Temporary," Emily echoed, and made herself believe it. What surprised her most was the clarity that the solitude brought. In the silence, with no social obligations or domestic performances, she rediscovered the sharp, analytical mind that had made her a formidable founder in the tech world. The woman who had spent years smoothing rough edges, who'd tamped down her ambition, emerged from beneath layers of practiced graciousness. Emily set to work, not on revenge, for that word felt childish and impulsive, but on repair and reclamation. The first call she made was not to a friend, but to her lawyer, Jacqueline Monroe, a relentless negotiator with a talent for turning technicalities into leverage. "You need to get me everything," Emily said. "Papers, contracts, board minutes, anything Carter & Carter has put my name on." There was no trace of victimhood in her voice, only the cold, measured tone of someone reclaiming her ground. Next came the quiet reconnections with old colleagues and trusted allies, people who remembered Emily as she had been years before David's shadow darkened her ambition. She sent emails, scheduled lunches, made calls to former CTOs and lead engineers whom she'd recruited in the company's earliest days. Emily didn't share details of her personal turmoil. Instead, she listened, gathered information, and pieced together an updated map of Carter & Carter's pulse. She noted whispers of questionable practices in financial reports, odd patterns in asset allocations, and the attrition of talented staff since David's ascension to sole leadership. In between these meetings, Emily devoted time to recalibrating her self-discipline. Each morning began with a run through the park, pushing her body until she rediscovered the strength in her own muscles. She dusted off notebooks and old files, reviewing ideas she'd once shelved to keep the peace at home. She read voraciously, legal handbooks on corporate law, memoirs of women who had survived worse. Her evenings were spent learning, new technologies, updates in the field, even mindfulness practices to sharpen her resolve. Her pain became fuel, her anger a silent engine. Yet Emily's transformation was not only internal. She attended events solo, carrying herself with a new kind of quiet confidence. At a networking reception for women entrepreneurs in Manhattan, she mingled with poise, answering polite questions about her transition while keeping her strategies veiled. She left every conversation with new contacts, never speaking ill of David or Olivia, refusing to appear rattled, never seen as a victim. Word of her unexpected resilience rippled through the local business community. Emily Carter was not fading away. She was sharpening. The nights were hardest. Alone in her small bedroom, surrounded by boxes and the hum of city traffic, Emily faced relentless self-doubt. Could she truly fight David, her husband, her partner, for what she'd rightfully built? Would people believe her, support her, or would the power he wielded as CEO obliterate her claims? For every voice that whispered defeat, another, quieter but insistent, reminded her of who she had been before the compromises and betrayals. She remembered the adrenaline of the first big deal, the pride of hiring her own staff, the thrill of innovation. David's betrayal might have shaken her foundation, but it could not erase her achievements. And so, Emily continued her quiet campaign. She documented every call, every interaction with David's legal team, every financial document she was able to access. She created an encrypted digital archive, organizing evidence with ruthless precision. Her lawyer, impressed by Emily's methodical approach, began to see not just a client, but a partner in litigation. One rainy afternoon, Emily met with Mark Bradley, a former CFO turned financial investigator, whom she'd once helped through a company crisis. Over coffee, she explained only what was necessary. "Mark, I need help finding out what's been buried in Carter & Carter's books, quietly." He agreed, loyalty outweighing curiosity. Emily knew her strength lay not only in what she knew, but in the discretion of those she trusted. Meanwhile, Olivia and David seemed to revel in their new status, their arrogance mirrored in public displays at community events and on social media. Emily observed them not with bitterness, but with the cold curiosity of a strategist studying adversaries. Every photograph, every fundraising mention, every statement David made as CEO, she cataloged for future use. By the end of the month, a profound transformation had taken root. Emily was no longer simply surviving, she was preparing. Her silence was not the mark of surrender, but the discipline of a chess master biding her time. Under the still surface, new alliances formed, evidence was amassed, and strength was forged anew. Standing by the window of her apartment, watching storm clouds gather over the city skyline, Emily allowed herself one final, private promise. She would not lose herself again. Her path forward would be defined not by the wounds inflicted, but by the resolve she summoned in the aftermath. The world had mistaken her composure for weakness, her silence for defeat. They would soon learn otherwise. Sifting through the past. A quiet Sunday morning found Emily Carter seated at the tiny dining table of her apartment, bathed in the dim gray light filtering through half-open blinds. Stacks of cardboard boxes framed her world, most still sealed. But on the table, a different kind of chaos had taken hold. Manila folders, old laptops, flash drives, and legal notepads, each representing a chapter in her journey with Carter & Carter Innovations. She sipped strong black coffee, the bitterness a necessary jolt, then set her cup down and opened her laptop with the solemnity of a surgeon preparing for an operation. Unlike the haze of her early grief, Emily was now running on crisp, clear logic. Every step was deliberate, systematic. She began by mapping out everything she had ever contributed to the company, scribbling years, project codes, and intellectual property filings onto a massive whiteboard she'd erected in her living room. It was a forest of color-coded note cards, Patents she had submitted, contracts she'd negotiated, product releases she'd led. Each marker trailed back to a year, a memory, some shared victory. Moments she now revisited with clinical detachment. Yet, as she worked, frustration swelled inside her. Much of that history had been gradually overwritten. Her role was minimized in public company records, her name rarely mentioned in recent board minutes or press releases. When the company started, Carter & Carter Innovations had been just her and David, two visionaries, equals in every respect. But the documentation told a different story, one updated over the years by David and his advisors. David alone credited for technical breakthroughs, David alone lauded in shareholder communications. Emily's strategy was to reconstruct the true story piece by piece. Her first step was a forensic review of all old digital archives she still had access to. Email chains with timestamps stretching back over a decade, drafts of patent applications, and versioned business plans saved to redundant drives. She downloaded copies under pseudonymous cloud accounts, conscious of potential surveillance. Through these late nights, she uncovered a trove of overlooked details. Her digital fingerprints on major design updates, saved meeting notes bearing her observations, early memos outlining the company's vision in her handwriting. She contacted a friend from her days as head of business development, a meticulous man named Alan. Over a private lunch in the city, Emily posed careful questions, never revealing her endgame. In the evenings, Emily pored through old contracts. She discovered telltale signs of David's increasing maneuvering, clauses subtly revised, language granting him additional voting rights, amendments executed while she was on business trips or at home with Sophie. The deeper she went, the clearer the pattern became. Deals closed without her full review, ownership diluted through roundabout legal maneuvers, assets quietly transferred between Carter & Carter and shell companies with opaque ties to David. She realized now that what she once chalked up to efficiency or trust had been a slow-burning betrayal, planned and hidden in the footnotes. The process was exhausting and relentless. Emily was careful to document everything in detail, developing elaborate spreadsheets to catalog what she found. She made late-night calls to her lawyer, Jacqueline, reviewing discovery protocols and best practices to preserve the digital chain of custody. They devised a system using encrypted storage and regular backups off-site, ensuring nothing could be tampered with or erased. Driven by a mix of rage and resolve, Emily returned to the company's early days in her mind, remembering the way she and David would brainstorm at their kitchen table. She remembered his charm, his ambition, a wildness that had drawn her in, and she realized now, blinded her to his capacity for calculated deceit. She found old text messages, back-and-forth notes scribbled on napkins and scanned into emails, even photographs at launch parties where she pitched customers while David networked with investors. All of it painted a richer picture of her outsized role, one David had tried to erase. Emily was methodical about locating witnesses. She began reaching out to former employees who had left under mysterious circumstances. Engineers whose projects were shelved without warning. An executive assistant who had seen the inner workings of David's daily routines. An accountant who whispered about creative bookkeeping. Each conversation required finesse. Emily understood her adversaries would deny everything if threatened. She disguised her inquiries as casual catch-ups, collecting small but vital pieces of corroborative testimony. Some leads were dead ends, others were gold. A former IT admin remembered retrieving emails deleted during a system migration. "I always kept redundant backups, just in case," he confided. "Never thought anyone would need them, but I have a couple of encrypted drives with old board correspondence. Most people don't even know they exist." Emily arranged for the drives to be dropped off at her lawyer's office for safekeeping. Emily also kept her investigation hidden from Sophie, determined not to let her daughter bear the brunt of adult wounds. Their nightly talks remained gentle, focused on homework, friends, and hopes for the future. But there were moments when Sophie caught her mother staring into space, lost in a labyrinth of memories and questions. "Mom, are you okay?" she'd ask quietly. Emily would always answer with a reassuring smile. "I'm just thinking, sweetheart." As days turned into weeks, Emily felt herself changing. The pain was still there, raw, familiar, a constant ache, but it was being reshaped into something sharper, a sense of purpose that replaced humiliation with determination. She started to see her own past not as a series of regrets, but as an arsenal, evidence, relationships, and memories that she could wield in her fight for justice. By the end of the month, Emily's digital archive had grown to thousands of files, each one sorted meticulously, annotated for context, cross-referenced against time-stamped corporate minutes and public filings. She'd even begun drafting a private timeline, mapping not only her own actions, but David's growing duplicity, connecting subtle shifts in the company's direction to key moments in their family life. The pattern was undeniable. Every time her trust expanded, David's shadow lengthened. Emily realized that her fight would not be won in grand gestures, but in the granular, invisible details only she remembered. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself a small, grim smile. The past was no longer a source of torment. It was her evidence, her shield, and soon, her revenge. The counterattack plan. The passage of weeks had remade Emily Carter in subtle but irrevocable ways. While the initial agony of betrayal had threatened to unravel her, a new surge of energy now animated her every move. She had spent nights combing through the tangled history of Carter and Carter innovations, days gathering evidence, but none of her efforts would matter without a plan. Her own plan. The time for defense had passed. Now, it was her turn to strike. Emily knew that David and Olivia, basking in what they believed was victory, had become sloppy. Their newfound confidence radiated in board meetings, social gatherings, and posts on social media. Each a small reminder to Emily that her former life was being paraded about as someone else's prize. But arrogance, she reasoned, was an exploitable weakness. From her modest White Plains apartment, Emily began drawing up her counterattack, not a flailing outburst of vengeance, but a cold, surgical campaign designed to reclaim her standing, her company, and her dignity. Building her team. Her first step was assembling the right allies. The blow of betrayal had exposed the limits of trust, but it had also clarified who in her world valued both discretion and justice. She leaned on Jacqueline Monroe, her attorney, not just for legal advice, but as a sounding board for strategy. Jacqueline would lead the legal charge, but Emily required expertise from other fronts: forensics, finance, technology. Over a week of careful outreach, some conversations staged over lunch, others behind closed doors, Emily brought together a small but formidable team. There was Mark Bradley, the financial investigator with razor-sharp instincts. Gina Shu, a cybersecurity consultant renowned for uncovering digital footprints no one else could see. Alan Foster from her company's early years, who still felt a debt to Emily after she'd defended his reputation in a board dispute. At their first meeting, held in the discreet back room of a legal library, Emily was clear-eyed and frank. No one moved. Mapping the battlefield. Emily started with the essentials. Who, exactly, now controlled Carter and Carter's operational heart? Where had David moved key assets? What were Olivia's vulnerabilities, and how had she managed to worm her way into company affairs, despite never having held an official role? Gina's first findings were alarming. Olivia, it turned out, had become a shadow advisor on several cross-company projects, funneling sensitive business information to third-party vendors, in which she had secret stakes. David had quietly altered board minutes and company filings to solidify his own voting power while obfuscating Emily's historical contributions. Several internal emails alluded to quick fixes for tax discrepancies, references to shell companies, and accounting anomalies flagged months earlier, and then ignored. Emily's team mirrored her meticulous nature. Gina documented file metadata, Mark constructed flowcharts of asset distributions, and Alan reached out confidentially to former staff, many of whom had exited under a cloud of intimidation or confusion. Their insights, layered, formed the skeleton of a much larger case than Emily had suspected. A deliberate campaign to erase her from the company's legacy and to shield illicit financial activities. Striking the first blows. The counterattack began quietly. Emily, through her attorney, submitted a formal request for a forensic audit of the company's financial records, citing her right as co-founder and equity holder. This triggered alarm bells for David, who responded with a dismissive but nervous letter, deriding her efforts as vindictive and groundless. Emily was not fazed. Every hostile reply was catalogued. Every delay added to the growing file of evidence that something was amiss. Meanwhile, Alan's confidential discussions with former engineers bore fruit. One described being pressured to sign off on a patent he didn't create. Another had witnessed Olivia attending supposedly closed-door board sessions. Emily's lawyer began preparing sworn affidavits, testimonies that, once presented, would lay the foundation for legal action not merely of divorce or division of assets, but of corporate fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. Emily also leveraged her restored standing in the business community. At a respected industry conference, she quietly suggested to influential acquaintances that Carter & Carter's leadership had become opaque since her departure. She asked pointed, public questions during Q&As with David, her tone civil but direct, forcing him to answer to accusations of staff turnover and financial inconsistencies with dozens of witnesses listening. Each public exchange was another pinprick, slowly undermining David's confidence and sowing seeds of doubt among their investors. Turning the social tables, Olivia, emboldened by her new role, continued to ride the wave of public adoration, posting staged photos of philanthropic events and luxury lifestyle moments. Emily, quietly and methodically, began to expose cracks. She reached out to board members' spouses, sharing, without accusation, her concern for Carter & Carter's reputation. She let slip news of the forensic audit to a popular business columnist, well known for sniffing out scandal. Meanwhile, social circles that once been dazzled by David and Olivia's success grew wary. Whispers about conflicts of interest tainted Olivia's name. Business partners, hearing of Emily's quiet but relentless return, started to keep their distance from Olivia, awaiting clarity about who might ultimately control Carter & Carter, preparing the masterstroke. Yet, Emily did not allow herself to act rashly. Every piece of evidence, every strategic rumor, was planned with the precision of a chess player thinking several moves ahead. When Mark confirmed that David had illegally transferred company IP to an offshore firm registered in Olivia's maiden name, Emily had her proof. The betrayal was not just personal, but criminal. The team prepared for the next phase, a court motion to freeze company assets and, simultaneously, a set of press releases drafted for the moment when the story would inevitably become public. Gina worked overtime to seal any digital trail that might warn David of what was coming. On a stormy Thursday evening, the team gathered one final time to review their evidence. Emily moved her gaze across each member, her posture unyielding, her voice almost serene. As they exited into the rain, Emily felt her fear replaced with an iron sense of clarity. She no longer needed to shout her pain or beg for recognition. In her silence, she had become a force. The world still saw her as a casualty, but soon they would see her as a contender, and then, finally, as the victor she would define for herself. Hidden conflict. Long before anything made the news or reached the boardroom, battle lines were drawn in invisible ink. The outward calm of Carter & Carter innovations masked a seething undercurrent, each player moving like a chess piece advancing on an elaborate board. Emily, once seen as the wounded party shunted to the sidelines, was now a silent architect of disruption, exploiting the cracks she'd mapped behind closed doors. Her campaign was nothing overt or theatrical. No angry public accusations, only relentless, calculated pressure applied where her adversaries least expected. It began with the board itself, a collection of executives and senior investors who had long been conditioned to align with David's lead. Weeks earlier, they'd barely blinked at Olivia's sudden presence or David's tightening grip on company votes. Now, rumors began to ripple quietly from one meeting to the next. Emily had worked behind the scenes to supply the audit committee with meticulously documented evidence. Emails reappeared that had been thought erased, contracts highlighted with amendments crafted when no one was looking. A friendly board member, once skeptical of Emily's resolve, privately confided, "There's a feeling something major's about to break." Emily merely smiled, her confidence unshakable. While these seeds of uncertainty germinated, Emily maintained her public restraint. At networking gatherings, she offered few details but uttered just enough to turn curiosity into concern. "I only hope Carter & Carter is being run with the integrity it was founded on," she would say, her voice sincere. Each understated remark shifted the narrative, and the company's partners began watching David with a touch more scrutiny. To outsiders, nothing seemed amiss, but inside the company, stress levels quietly soared. Department heads whispered about unusual audits, leadership's irritability, and the strange closeness between David and Olivia. Meanwhile, David lurched between bravado and paranoia. His emails grew abrupt, his office door stayed closed for hours, and an unfamiliar tension crept into his Friday check-in meetings. As former confidants went silent, he leaned even more on Olivia, relying on her to help monitor employee loyalty and quash rumors. They doubled down on their image, a dynamic power couple. Olivia, draped in designer elegance at benefit galas, wore her triumph like a mask. But those who knew her best caught the rigidity in her laugh, the watchfulness in her gaze. She posted carefully curated photos online, all smiles and sophistication, at exactly the moments when the company most needed reassurance. Hallway conversations at the Carter & Carter headquarters became laden with double meanings. Phrases like, "That's above my pay grade," or "Let's wait for leadership," signaled a growing caution. One IT analyst who had helped Emily in the past was grilled for over an hour by Olivia on the supposed misplacement of archived files. He played dumb, heart-pounding, then left her office and immediately signaled Emily, who documented every incident with meticulous detail for her legal team. Elsewhere, Emily's lawyer, Jacqueline Monroe, orchestrated carefully timed legal maneuvers. Each motion unveiled more irregularities, undeclared offshore accounts, suspicious vendor payments, and a bonus structure benefiting Olivia's shell firm. Jacqueline relayed the results in brief, encrypted calls. "David's side is starting to fracture. Our documentation is setting off alarms with regulators as well as the board. Keep the pressure steady." Emily thanked her quietly, pressing on with daily routines and new meetings, never letting her professional mask slip. It was the subtle moves that cut deepest. Emily quietly reached out to several legacy clients, institutions that had trusted her analytical acumen from the company's founding. She offered them transparency, not complaint, hinting that future contracts might hinge on a shift in company culture. At least one major contract paused their renewal, demanding clarification on leadership structure. News of this got back to Olivia the same day, whose smile instantly faded. The knowledge that Emily still commanded quiet, private respect even in exile gnawed at Olivia far more than any public confrontation could. Socially, too, loyalties began to split. At neighborhood parties, Emily appeared polished and unbothered. Olivia, for the first time, was greeted with restraint. Some old friends offered her only curt nods. Others avoided eye contact completely. In Westchester's tight-knit upper circles, silence was far more damning than gossip. A fundraising committee for the local children's hospital, once co-chaired by Emily and Olivia, asked David if he would consider withdrawing Olivia's name from the upcoming event, citing unnecessary distraction. The sting was immediate and public. With each small victory, Emily's confidence in her counteroffensive deepened. But there was little celebration, only more work. At night, she would stand by her apartment window, city lights flickering in the mist, and review everything with a general's eye for detail. Her digital archive now included sworn affidavits, whistleblower testimony, and correspondence with regulatory agencies. She coached her witnesses in how to document interactions safely, checking on their well-being, refusing to let her cause fall into carelessness or vengeance. Yet the greatest battle remained psychological. David and Olivia, faced with mounting scrutiny, turned on each other in ways subtle but unmistakable. Emily, through her contacts, heard of a late-night argument in the executive suite, a door slamming, muffled voices. The next morning, Olivia arrived at the office alone, her facade cracked, snapping at assistants and glaring at junior staff. David, visibly tired and less polished, retreated further into isolation, surrounded by lawyers and risk consultants. The pressure bled into company performance. Productivity slipped as rumors swirled. Analysts questioned projections during quarterly calls. Emily, meanwhile, fed select data points to a pair of business journalists she trusted, hinting at leadership missteps and possible ethical breaches, all without leaving her fingerprints. Articles began to appear. Questions, not accusations, but enough to spook investors further. The machinery of hidden conflict ran on silence, uncertainty, and strategic deployment of truth. Emily had no interest in public humiliation. She wanted accountability, not just for herself, but for the many who'd built Carter & Carter in good faith. She listened to lawyers, to friends, to her daughter's steady encouragement, and refined her approach with unflagging discipline. Every emotionally charged moment was transmuted into leverage. Every setback recalibrated into a new tactic. By the end of the month, the air inside Carter & Carter Innovations was electric with tension. A handful of executive resignations followed surprise audit inquiries. Regulatory agencies scheduled meetings that no one had anticipated. Emily received a cautious, respectful email from the chair of the board requesting a confidential conversation regarding the future of the company. For the first time since her exile began, she allowed herself a real, private smile. Hidden conflict, after all, had always been her greatest strength. Navigating what others could not see, resisting the urge to lash out prematurely. As the storm gathered toward open confrontation, Emily Carter stood prepared, unharmed by the blows struck in the shadows. With each new maneuver, she set the stage for a reckoning that would be fought not just in headlines, but in the balance sheets, the backrooms, and, inevitably, before the eyes of those whose trust had been betrayed. The confrontation, the first signs of reckoning, arrived quietly but unmistakably. A sealed envelope, embossed with the insignia of the New York Supreme Court, appeared on David's mahogany desk one Thursday. The boardroom, once his domain, now felt like the staging ground for a siege. As his fingers broke the seal, he knew, before reading a word, exactly what and who had set these wheels turning. Emily's legal filing was explosive in its precision. It accused David and Olivia of fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and misappropriation of assets. The forensic audit she'd engineered exposed deals made behind the board's back, shell companies, and the systematic erasure of her name from the company's foundational intellectual property. Accompanying the civil motion was an emergency injunction, freezing key assets and blocking any attempt to liquidate or hide funds. With every page, David's confidence wavered. By the end, he was pale and tight-jawed, the room closing in with a pressure he couldn't deny. That Friday, the board convened for an emergency meeting. The glass-walled conference hall, once the site of so many triumphs, crackled with nervous energy as each director shuffled in. papers clutched, glances wary. Emily arrived last, purposeful and utterly composed, flanked by her attorney Jacqueline Monroe and financial investigator Mark Bradley. Her presence alone was a declaration. She was no longer invisible, and whatever settlement David and Olivia had hoped to negotiate privately was now out in the open. David opened with brittle bluster. "I would remind everyone here of our company's values: loyalty, growth, discretion. I urge the board not to be distracted by sensational accusations from a disgruntled ex-partner." Jacqueline was swift and methodical. "What we have are not accusations, but documented facts. We've provided each of you with backup documentation, original records, and sworn affidavits. This is not about sentiment. It's about Carter and Carter's legal and ethical standing." Emily watched as the board examined the exhibits. Emails cross-referenced with accounting logs, patent applications in her handwriting, wire transfers linking company accounts to offshore entities in Olivia's name. At first, the director's eyes flicked nervously between David and Olivia. But as the evidence mounted, their expressions shifted from anxiety to incredulity to anger. Years of trust, now crumbling. Olivia tried to intervene. "This is a witch hunt, an attempt to destroy what we've built out of spite." Her voice, once so practiced and charismatic, now rang hollow in the high-ceilinged room. But the tide had shifted. Alan Foster, the board member whom Emily had quietly reconnected with, spoke. "We built this enterprise on partnership and integrity, not deception. If even half of this is true, it's not a private matter. It's a failure of leadership." David's attempt at resolve melted into venom. "Emily, we offered you an exit. You could have walked away with dignity and peace. Do you really want to drag the entire company down over a personal vendetta?" Emily responded with a measured calm that sliced through his rage. "This was never about revenge, only the truth. Carter and Carter doesn't belong to lies. It was my vision as much as yours, David. I owe it to everyone who believed in us to set things right." The press caught wind in hours. That same afternoon, business reporters gathered, cameras poised, outside the sleek, classically columned headquarters. Microphones captured statements as the board released a cautious but damning announcement. A special investigation was underway. Executive powers were being reassessed. For the first time, David and Olivia had no script to hide behind. In the chaos, Olivia cracked. She was summoned to provide testimony before the board and forensic accountants, squirming as her offshore ownership of vendor firms was dissected. Her public composure failed at last in a now infamous moment. Storming out of the hearing, she was caught by a swarm of reporters. "They'll never prove anything. We made that company," she snapped, before being hustled into a waiting car. David, once the darling of Westchester business circles, became a fixture outside conference rooms flanked by lawyers. The tone with which bankers and clients greeted him soured by the hour. Worst of all were the silences. Calls unreturned. Invitations quietly withdrawn. Within days, rumors of resignation, even indictment, buzzed across business media. Meanwhile, Emily kept her own counsel. She granted no interviews, issued no triumphant proclamations. Instead, she spent long hours with Jacqueline and Mark, preparing for the public hearing that would decide the fate not only of the company, but of her life's work. On the morning of the hearing, Emily stood before the full board in the largest conference room, sunlight gleaming off the long table. The gallery was packed. Board members, lawyers, even several journalists with special permission. Unlike David, she spoke simply. "Every decision I made here was with the belief that we could do something meaningful, something honorable. When those values were violated, I had no choice but to speak up. I believe what's right will win out. Days passed in a whirlwind of official motions, statements, and breaking headlines. The external auditor's preliminary findings appeared in the news. Emily's role as co-founder was re-established. She was cleared of wrongdoing. Summaries of David's and Olivia's conflicts of interest and misuse of company funds were leaked. The Attorney General's office opened a parallel review into financial crimes. But the greatest confrontation was not in documents or conference rooms. It was in one private moment, late at night, when Emily met David in a dimly lit hallway after yet another grueling board session. He looked older, the swagger gone, his anger eroded by exhaustion and the realization that his empire had turned to sand. "I never thought you'd actually fight back," he whispered. "Maybe that was your mistake," Emily replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "But you don't get to erase me, or what I built." He shook his head, lost. "You'll never get the loyalty I had." "Maybe not," she said softly. "But I have the truth, and that's enough." She walked away, pulse steady, heart strangely light. By week's end, Olivia was formally removed from all company committees and asked to resign her board advisory role. Public statements from old friends and charitable groups made their position clear. They would no longer support her. David, under mounting pressure, agreed to step aside pending further investigation, forced to resign his CEO post. The board offered Emily an interim leadership role while the company stabilized. There were still months of legal battles, asset negotiations, and reconciliation ahead. But in the war of truth, the confrontation Emily had feared for so long was over. She did not celebrate. She simply went home, changed into comfortable clothes, and sat by her window as dusk softened the city below. Peace felt closer than it had in years. Not because the struggle was over, but because she was finally standing in her own light, defined not by betrayal, but by resilience and integrity. And as the sky darkened, Emily knew this confrontation was not just an ending, but the clean, bracing air before a new beginning. Truth and resolution. In the weeks following the confrontation, Carter & Carter Innovations was a company transformed. The corridors that once hummed with nervous tension grew calm, as if letting out a collective breath that had been held for months. The days of secrets and silent maneuvering were finally over. Instead, the company was forced to confront the sweeping changes, the fallout, the reformation, and the slow, deliberate return to integrity. The first step was transparency. A special session was called in the grand boardroom, sunlight streaming in as the company's leadership faced both their employees and select members of the public. Emily, now officially named interim CEO, stood at the head of the table. She didn't try to appear flawless or heroic. Instead, her message was simple. They would confront the past honestly and rebuild with clarity. She began the town hall by acknowledging the pain, disappointment, and fear so many had felt during the months of instability. Employees were invited to speak candidly about what had gone wrong. The breakdown of trust, the atmosphere of intimidation, the sudden departures of talented colleagues. Anonymous testimonies, collected by the new HR director, revealed a troubling pattern. Under David's rule, creative innovation had been stifled by paranoia. Under Olivia's influence, favoritism and secrecy had flourished. Emily's first order of business was to shore up morale. Carter & Carter was built on the vision of breakthrough technology and ethical leadership, she announced, her voice steadier than she felt. Both of those ideals were lost. It's my job, and all of ours, to restore them. That starts today. Behind the scenes, the investigation completed its work. The company's legal counsel coordinated with prosecutors, providing reams of documentation. fraudulent contracts, altered board minutes, and records of intellectual property theft. Both David and Olivia were formally charged with multiple counts. David with breach of fiduciary duty and fraud. Olivia with conspiracy and financial misappropriation. Their assets were frozen. Their names became synonymous with scandal, not brilliance. The headlines were relentless. Business journals ran exposés on corporate betrayal and the personal costs of unchecked ambition. The Westchester Gazette printed an editorial, Emily Carter and the Price of Silence, outlining the years of subtle erasure she'd endured and her unwavering resolve. Former friends of David and Olivia distanced themselves in droves. Even the private social clubs that once embraced the couple quietly revoked their memberships. At community gatherings, old acquaintances would look away, offering only curt, uncomfortable nods. Olivia, once a darling of high society, found her invitations vanished and her reputation in tatters. Sophie, Emily's daughter, adjusted to this new reality with a wisdom beyond her years. She watched as classmates whispered about her family, but saw in her mother something she'd never fully appreciated: resilience without bitterness. Emily protected Sophie from the storm as best she could, ensuring her life was filled with normalcy, school, laughter, simple evenings at home. But one night, as Emily tucked her in, Sophie reached out and squeezed her hand with gentle certainty. "You did the right thing, Mom. I'm proud of you." In that moment, for the first time since her exile, Emily felt truly seen, not as a victim or a warrior, but as a mother. Settlement talks stretched on for weeks, but Emily and her legal team stood firm. She refused any agreement that failed to publicly restore her name and legal rights as Carter and Carter's true co-founder. She also pushed for restitution, demanding not only her share of the company's assets, but public acknowledgement of her role in creating the firm's most important innovations. In the final settlement, David relinquished his remaining shares, transferring controlling interests to Emily. The agreement made headlines. Carter and Carter returns to its roots under Emily Carter's leadership. The company issued a formal statement, accompanied by an industry-wide press release, crediting Emily as a visionary and architect of its founding technology. In a symbolic moment, the main lobby's commemorative wall, once dedicated solely to David's achievements, was refitted to display a new plaque, founded by David and Emily Carter in pursuit of integrity and innovation. Olivia, meanwhile, was barred from serving on any board of directors or in a fiduciary position at any publicly traded company for the next decade. The damage to her friendships was irreversible. She withdrew from community life, and her bitterness became its own form of isolation. David's decline was equally steep. Without his reputation, he lost most of his advisory and investment roles. For the first time in his adult life, his charm and cunning failed him. He moved out of Westchester, leaving behind only scattered remnants of the empire he'd built and then nearly destroyed. But vindication was not the same as happiness. Emily knew her victory would always carry a weight. The sacrifice of years lost to duplicity and the realization that even justice could not restore innocence. Yet she chose not to let bitterness define her. Instead, she set about fostering a new culture at Carter & Carter. Collaborative, innovative, and transparent. She promoted several women into key leadership positions and started a mentorship program for young engineers who had been overlooked before. She also established a foundation using a portion of her own restitution, a nonprofit focused on ethical leadership training for tech entrepreneurs. "We must teach future founders that success at the expense of character is no victory at all," she told the press during the foundation's launch. Slowly, the company's fortunes rebounded. Clients returned, vendors expressed renewed faith, and recruitment efforts attracted talented candidates inspired by Emily's story. The word resilience became synonymous with Carter and Carter's brand. One clear afternoon, with the city skyline glittering outside her new office window, Emily paused to reflect on what had been lost and gained. She thought about the betrayal, the late-night doubts, the public humiliations, the friendships broken forever, but found that they no longer haunted her. She had chosen a harder road, a lonely one at times, but it was paved with honesty and courage. For the first time, she allowed herself a feeling close to contentment. In the quiet after the storm, Emily walked through the corridors of Carter and Carter and saw new life returning. Teams collaborating at whiteboards, laughter echoing across open spaces, a sense of hope. She knew the future would bring more challenges. But now, every morning, she looked in the mirror and saw not the scars of battle, but a testament to survival, dignity, and uncompromising integrity. The truth had tested her. It had cost her. But in the end, it had also set her free. New beginnings. The autumn air in Westchester had always felt crisp and clean, but now it carried a new meaning for Emily Carter. The storms of legal battles, betrayal, and public scrutiny had passed. For the first time in years, she could walk under the gold-lit trees and feel untethered. Not by bitterness, not by memory, but by the promise of what might come next. Moving forward wasn't about pretending the past hadn't happened. If anything, Emily wore her scars in plain sight. But now, they were badges of hard-earned wisdom rather than wounds. Her first task wasn't some bold new initiative or a public rebranding. It was the gradual, personal act of reclaiming her daily life. She learned to savor singular moments, her hands cradling a mug of hot coffee each morning, the sound of Sophie's laughter at the kitchen table, the rhythm of quiet footfalls as she jogged through the park before dawn. The apartment in White Plains transformed from a sanctuary into a launching pad. Emily decorated minimally but with care. Bright paintings she'd picked up from local artists, a low shelf filled with books on technology, resilience, and poetry. Photographs of her and Sophie, and of Carter and Carter's earliest days, stood proudly among them. She kept no images of David, nor even any relics of the social circles she had once belonged to, by design. This was a space for becoming, not looking back. Her relationship with Sophie, once buffered by polite avoidance during the upheaval, deepened into something new. They muddled through the aftermath together. Some evenings were spent curled up on the worn gray couch, sharing bowls of popcorn and earnest conversations about change and courage. Sometimes Sophie would ask questions about her father or about Olivia. Emily, honest but careful, never let old anger take the reins. Instead, she spoke of choices, both the ones people make and the ones you reclaim for yourself. Schoolwork, college applications, and basketball games provided rhythmic stability for Sophie, while Emily quietly turned her attention to Carter and Carter's future. The board, after months of transition, voted unanimously to make her official CEO. A decision met with applause from employees and wary optimism from the broader tech community. Investor confidence was returning, but Emily knew true change would be slow, nuanced, and deeply personal for every staff member who had endured the ordeal. She began her first week as CEO with small gestures rather than sweeping decrees. Open-door office hours, impromptu coffee breaks with engineering teams, handwritten notes to employees who'd weathered the storm with dignity. She encouraged honest feedback, even when it was difficult to hear. One project manager, voice trembling, admitted she'd considered quitting during the chaos. "You reminded us what it means to actually care. That's why I stayed." Mentoring became Emily's passion. She sought out junior developers, women in mid-level roles, and anyone who'd felt voiceless under the old regime. "You don't owe anyone silence," she told a nervous young engineer during a private meeting. "Innovation comes from those who are brave enough to speak and to question." The mentorship program she'd started rapidly outgrew its budget, drawing in volunteers from other companies and alumni she'd helped nurture years before. Outside the glass towers of innovation, Emily's new foundation to support ethical leadership gained traction. At networking events in Manhattan and local entrepreneurship panels, she shared not only Carter and Carter's resurgence, but also the lessons etched from her own failures and recovery. "True influence," she said during one keynote, "isn't about power over others. It's about elevating character, especially when it's difficult. If we can build that into our companies, we'll build it into society." The message struck a chord, spawning partnerships with local universities and invitations to speak at national conferences. Privately, Emily indulged in passions long abandoned. She learned to cook new recipes, took up sketching in the evenings, and sometimes allowed herself weekends at the Hudson Valley art galleries. She made new friends, not on the basis of ambition or social standing, but through running groups, parent-teacher committees, and shared interests. No longer desperate for validation, Emily finally allowed herself to trust, cautiously but freely. As autumn yielded to winter, Sophie received an early acceptance letter from her preferred university. Their celebration was intimate, the significance unspoken but deeply felt. "You taught me to never let fear have the last word," Sophie said quietly. Emily realized, with a swell of pride and humility, that their journey had not just been about survival, but about the inheritance of strength across generations. Carter and Carter itself glimmered with renewal. Old partnerships were rekindled. Instead of focusing only on profit, Emily worked with the board to build collaborative, employee-friendly initiatives. Flexible schedules, sabbaticals for research and community service, and transparent quarterly town halls. Quarterly financials showed steady growth, but for Emily, the true victory was hearing engineers debate new ideas in the open, unafraid. The air had changed at home and in the company, but Emily's own sense of possibility was the greatest transformation. She rarely thought of David and Olivia now. When she did, it was with a clean detachment. They, too, had shaped her journey, but they no longer defined her days. Instead, she focused her energy on mentoring, innovation, and the quiet contentment of a well-lived life. One evening, as snow fell in gentle drifts outside her apartment window, Emily reflected on the distance she had traveled. The city lights glimmered, a mosaic of millions of other lives, each bearing triumphs and struggles. She understood now that new beginnings did not mean forgetting what came before, but carrying its lessons with grace. She was not unscarred, not unmarked by betrayal or disappointment, but she was whole, and she was free. On her desk, a blank notebook waited. Emily opened it and began to write. Not a business plan or a legal brief, but a letter of gratitude to those who had stood by her, to the woman she had been, and to the unknown future she was finally ready to embrace. The world outside was not any easier, nor the road ahead any less uncertain. Yet as dawn broke the next day, Emily Carter met it with open eyes, steady hands, and a heart no longer burdened by illusions. She had not just survived, she had started anew, bolder than before, a woman transformed, unbreakable, and utterly ready for whatever was to come.